Hello and welcome to today's episode. Today we have the amazing Meghan Ogilvie, who is the CEO of Dog Tag Bakery and Dog Tag Inc. Dog Tag Bakery is an incredible neighborhood bakery that is set up with a very special group community in mind, the community of veterans and military families. And Dog Tag is incredible because not only are they a wonderful bakery with wonderful cookies and all the goods and coffee and all the things, but they have a fellowship program that helps veterans and their families step into their entrepreneurial skills and build out their skill set coming back into civilian life or integrating into civilian life. And so Meghan talks a lot about the wonderful opportunities that the fellowship offers, the alumni network offers, but also ways for us to, as a community and culture, to really understand and create a sense of belonging for each and every person who's impacted by our military experience here in our country, whether that be veterans or military families. How important it is for us to not only honor the service that they generously offered for our country, but also to hold our arms open and to welcome them into what is a different reality than being on the front lines. And so in this episode, Meghan talks about so many different things, so many different aspects of her story, her background, and the integral work, the pivotal work, and the truly transformational work that she is doing at Dog Tag with her incredible team and this entire network of folks to really bring the veterans experience in the veteran community to the forefront and also activate so much of the innovation that these wonderful human beings have to offer to the business world and beyond. And so if you are in DC and are looking for some baked goods, definitely go to Dog Tag. But before, have a listen to this episode and learn more all about Meghan and Dog Tag. Can't wait to catch you on the other side of the episode. Meghan, welcome to Checkbox Other. I'm so excited that you're here.
Yeah, I'm so stoked, Nikki. It's gonna be awesome.
It's going to be. And just so you all know, we already started nerding out before we got on here. And I was like, oh, wait, hold on. Both of us were like, we're going to talk about that later. And it just kept going. So this is going to be a great conversation. So what I always start with guests is I encourage them to give a Cliff Notes version of their journey. The twists, the turns, the aha moments that led you to where you are today. Whether it's like formal bio or like however you want to go with it, we're here with you. We're here for the ride. So I'd love to hear that Cliff Notes version for you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it again, and I appreciate all the hearing your podcast and hearing all the different stories. It is fascinating, just kind of the humanity, right, and being able to connect in that very simple way. So, yeah, I guess for my journey, I'm the youngest of four in a Marine Corps family. I always say my dad served for 26 years, my sister served for 6. And my mom served for all of it. So I don't think I realized until I was older the impacts of having kind of the Marine Corps and military life and the values and ethos it naturally has on my life until I had to start making my own decisions. And there was definitely some pivotal points for sure that, I kind of was like, wow, like how am I finding my way to serve, right? How am I adding value to the world that only I can do or I should be? And so, yeah, I was really, again, I had a great childhood. Youngest of 4. I joke I got my butt kicked a lot, but my siblings would say that's the opposite. But I was fortunate. I played soccer, went to school and played soccer, played professional in Iceland, super random. Had an amazing time, played for a team called Breidablik. And then I came home and was like, what am I going to do with my life? I've been an athlete my entire, identity. And I moved to New York. I became a receptionist. I then started working on it actually in finance. I got an opportunity to work on a trading desk as an analyst for middle office equities for institutional and domestic clients. And I took one day of macro in college and was like, this is for the birds. Like, I'll never do this. And then all of them I'm in a suit and I'm literally like dealing. So it was fascinating. I was at Lehman. There was a bit of a crash there that didn't go so well. Went to Barclays and then ended up leaving and going to another company called Macquarie. And working for 2 women in finance, which was really fascinating. Again, the struggle of kind of how am I finding my way to serve? And it wasn't until my best friend from college introduced me to Father Richard Curry, who was a Jesuit priest, born missing his right forearm and dedicated his life to working with people with different abilities. And he said, he had this amazing idea for a bakery called Dog Tag in Washington, D.C. to serve veterans and military families. I literally convinced them to hire me. And after 6 years of New York, I left my life and moved to DC. And that was moved to DC in April of 2012. And here I am today, the CEO. Been there for almost 11 years, which is mind-boggling. But yeah, I guess, my journey has not been direct. I think that's what I always try to share with our fellows. Everyone thinks it's A, B, C, D. And the line is really like A, X, F, asterisk, question mark, backslash.
Emojis.
And I think I had jobs in between there. I was in insurance billing. I was a substitute teacher for kindergartners. I got my butt kicked like those. That's no joke. I was a waitress. I coached. And I think there's just the beauty of life. I think, especially at the younger ages, if you can get the support and encouragement of whether it's family, friends, mentors, partners, just to figure it out, like just to kind of figure out what brings you joy, what keeps you passionate. It could be people and it could be systems, but the point is everyone has their own. And so I was, to this day, I feel that that's still part of my ethos and values, right? Of like how I lead and how I think about, like, how do I stay curious, right? How do I make sure I still want to be a student of our organization? Because the day you stop caring to think about that is the day you say, why don't I care anymore, right? So yeah, that's kind of been my journey. I think as that's probably the shortest I've ever done it.
You nailed it. First of all,
the benefit of everybody.
I feel like I'm watching a movie and these kind of questions. It was my favorite because my brain is like, oh yeah, cool. We're in a plane here. We're in this place here. We're, even just being a substitute teacher, I'm like, all right, we're in a classroom right now. Like, so it was. Oh yeah. Your Cliff Notes was, there's a lot of things I nerded out about internally, and I was like, keep yourself together. I try not to like over gesticulate here.
Open book. Open book.
I think the part of this that was so, at least so obvious for me, was your just willingness to try new things, your willingness to like give as much of yourself and learn as much from that moment. So really staying as open as possible to things that you're like, well, this wasn't necessarily the plan, but there's so much wisdom that's coming in. And there is, I think there's so many different elements of that spark in my brain of commonality we have, but also in like, oh, that's the, if that skill set came from here. I think I too am a soccer player, grew up kicking a soccer ball pretty much before I could walk. And I think there is something about seeing the world, especially for soccer, you have to be able to see all the different elements. Like in one moment, you could be on offense or defense within seconds. And so the ability to be able to kind of pivot and change and see all the different players is so important. And it sounds like as all these opportunities were like nudging you, encouraging you, inviting you, even more so like kind of kicking you out to go do something else, the ability for you to be nimble and flexible and open, but also trusting yourself and your ability to handle things that you're like, wait a second, I said I was never do this. How did I end up here? And having that kind of continue on a direction that's like, oh, okay, I'm still here. I'm still myself. I'm still learning these things. Maybe it's not what I knew was going to happen, but it's so important.
Yeah, it's interesting. And being an athlete, I think being part of something bigger yourself, right? I think there's something about that. It could be band and debate. It could be a sports team. It could be a group of individuals that you just become super tight with, but you start recognizing like you are not like the sum is better than the individual, right? Yes. And I think, the interesting thing is as I kind of grew in my career, I mean, I'm sure you did this as well. I missed a lot of shots, right? I missed penalty kicks that I should have made and I was depended on. Yeah. And I think that the one thing that being on a team for me, which taught me is that you missed it. All right, what do we learn from it? By the way, you have to show up tomorrow anyways, right? You have to be at practice the next day. Yeah. And it was kind of like in its own right, it built this resiliency of like, all right, well, it's not really about how you fall, it's how you get back up. And I think that, there's some games that like you shouldn't have won, but you did. There are games where you hit the post like 17 times and you're like, I'm going to keep shooting, even though I know I'm going to hit the post again. Yeah. And I think there's like an unfair nature of soccer, right? I think it's a perfectly unperfect sport in so many ways. But the true reality is like you won as a team, you lost as a team, you trained as a team, like again, and it really was that mentality for me. Now, where I sometimes felt a little bit like I naturally had that kind of leadership component, and I think it's from just my parents and my again, maybe it's the military background. I don't know what was kind of part of my core, but I never really had the killer instinct. I always wanted to win, but I didn't ever want to win at like at a cost of something that was like my team or like leaving my team to go to a better team. I loved my team. I loved the culture of it. We came in second a bunch of times, not first, right? But like for me, I'm still super connected with those women I played with starting at like age 11 and 18, and I learned some of my biggest lessons in life. And so I think like, and it was like this idea of being cutthroat and just anything to win. I didn't have it. I still don't really have it. And it's a weird thing to kind of come to terms with. Like, you're an athlete, I played basketball, but I don't think it's about being cutthroat for me. Like for me, like I don't want to win alone, right? I played a team sport for a reason. And I think that's how I think about, my professional career as well. Like I find joy in celebrating together. Opportunities that I've been fortunate to like represent dog tag, I'm representing those that I work with, those that I serve, right? Like I don't need that for me. I don't value it. I value like who I get to represent at those moments and hope they feel the joy and excitement that this opportunity brings to us all. So I think there's been like an interesting like being an athlete. And I think the hard part, right, is like truly like I was a captain in college, which was such a great honor. Starting like my spring of sophomore year, but like, and then I decided to go to Iceland because the women's league had crashed. All my friends are going to business school or they're going to the workforce and they have it figured out. And I'm like, I'm gonna go to Iceland, like two of my teammates. And it was crazy. Two other Americans came and it was this really phenomenal experience. And we won the cup, we won the league. It was just bonkers. It was just like once in a lifetime. But I still came home and I was like, what skill sets do I have? Right? Like, what do you have to offer the world? I'm a sociology major, which I still am very proud of. Like, I love people, I love cultures, I love the understanding like how we create societal norms and who creates and what, I'm sure we could have a whole like, fiesta over that. But like, I think part of it has always been that kind of bigger question of like the why behind it and how does it fill your cup?
And how are we connected, I think, is a part of that too. That's like, even if it's seemingly disconnected, it isn't. And we might not know the why right now, but we trust that there is a why that's going to reveal itself as we go, which I think gives you that permission to be like, I am not just going to win at all costs. I am not going to lose myself in order to achieve something that actually doesn't fill my cup. Okay. I would love to hear, because the thing that's beautiful as I start asking these questions is like, I hear a bunch of other stories, but I would love to hear from you about a time in your life where you have felt other, different, or as though you didn't belong, and how that has shaped your way of interacting with the world, the work you do, your why out there in this crazy world we live in.
No, it's such a, again, it's a really intriguing question because it kind of makes you think about like, have I ever felt other or have I? And there has been that, right? For sure. And I think there's definitely like these lonely inflection points in life that, it's like, oh, that's when I really struggled, but I pushed through. And it's like great to be able to reflect back on, but those times are pretty tough. I think, and this is actually, I don't really share this with most people, but I think one of the things that was most influential and continues to be in my life is, again, I had a very specific, a wonderful child upbringing with two parents who worked exceptionally hard. They were like I always tell a story. My mom said, whenever you leave the house, she would say, remember who you are. Right. And it was like it was like support and like a reality check, right? If you go out there and make an idiot of yourself, like you represent your father and I and your sister and your brothers, right? And it was the reverse too. It was also like, remember, we got your back. So it was always very intentional. Like I always knew, had that in the back of my, I could be going to practice, I could be going to school, like it was every day. And then my dad, again, when I decided that kind of going towards the military was not my calling, he said, you're going to find your way to serve. Those are two very big moments in my life that kind of, whether consciously or subconsciously, like they just became part of who I was, right? And that helped myself kind of find my northern stars. I think one of the other things that happened is that when I went to college, I was really fortunate to go to University of Richmond, a small private school, but it was just a total different demographic than I was used to. It was a private school. and again, this is not a knock, it's fairly wealthy, right? I was very fortunate being part of a military family. We lived in the middle class, probably in comparison to the rest of the country, higher up in upper class. We just lived a very simple kind of frugal life in different ways, but I wanted for nothing, but we did not live a life of exorbitant.
Yeah.
And then going to a very interesting school that had a lot of varying privileges. I just was like surprised. I just didn't know about, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Boarding school where I'm from is like, you're in trouble. You got to go to boarding school.
Yeah.
Boarding school there is like all these people are just
Everybody did.
really bad
Yeah.
kids. Like, oh no, they're not. They're actually. But what happened is there was like a 6-month time period where our next door neighbor, who's our best friend growing up, had a brain aneurysm. My best friend's father passed away on September 11th, not due to September 11th. And then on February 6th, my mom went to bed and like woke up paralyzed. That all happened within 6 months. Like, so I went from being 18 and like graduating high school and again, feeling very exceptionally fortunate in so many ways. And then just like reality kind of just, or like the realities of life, right, really came to the forefront. Like hospitals were just normal. And like my mom literally after 55 years raising 4 kids, moving I think 14 times in 26 years.
Wow.
And serving the Marine Corps, right? That was just my dad's service. Like,
Yeah.
two tours in Okinawa, like just rock star, woke up and couldn't walk. And the doctors couldn't figure out why.
Yeah.
And I remember getting a phone. I called my parents. I'd gone to my roommate's basketball game. I called my parents and I was like, hey, Dad's like, hey, your mom's having some really bad back problems. She's her legs are a little numb. So she's at the hospital. I'm sure it's fine. And like, it was a really curious phone call because my dad it was just confusing because he just didn't know. The doctors didn't know.
Yeah.
To this day, they still don't know what happened. Right. But what ended up happening is every weekend from February on, drove home from Richmond to DC to just be with my family and my parents. And my mom had to learn how to walk again. And she learned, I mean, she did. She learned to walk again. She's like this, hand controls to drive, started going back to church and lecturing at church. And it was amazing, but it was kind of this challenge, right? I go from my mom rock star at rehab, right? Living in a rehab facility, then going back to like school and this very different, like the dichotomy between the two. And I was changing and I was becoming whether I recognized I had depression or anxiety as a younger kid, I don't think so.
Right.
I just, I think I channeled it different ways. And this kind of started bringing out. And that summer I spent kind of basically being my mom's caregiver. My sister took off time, and my dad became my mom's caregiver. And it was this point in my life where I was like what I was doing in supporting, and I the greatest honor I could ever have is to help take care of my mom in any way possible, in the way that she took care of 4 of us. But it created humanity inside of me that I wish I didn't know, like in some ways. I don't want but like it is the reality of like the compassion and empathy, like that I wouldn't have understood in any other way. And I think part of it is like it changed my want in life, right? It's like you can have everything you want in front of you, but if your health is shit, it doesn't matter. Like it really doesn't.
And your health can go at any moment. I mean, the kind of mystery of it all, that's like 18. The other thing is, right, this is like, it's difficult for anybody at any age. And also 18, this is the pocket of time in your life where you are charting your way out in the world and remember who you are, but like, remember who you are. And when the door you're walking back in every day isn't necessarily our home. So you're still charting your own identity forward. And that first year of college, I mean, it's, playing soccer, your life is very structured. Your identity is shifting, molding, changing as you start being like, okay, who do I want to be in this world? And then to have life be like, by the way, this is really hard. And like, not just really hard, but like out of your control, really hard when you're just trying to figure your stuff out. Again, you think at 18, 19, whatever, you think you're an adult. It's like, we don't know what we don't know yet. But also I am forced to grow up fast. I am forced to be able to have those existential questions of like, who am I? What's my purpose in the world?
Yeah.
What matters to me? How can I contribute? How can I serve? And how
Yeah.
powerful that is, and how not only you see yourself, but the people close to you, but also the world around you, which it sounds like so many
Yeah.
levels and layers were showing themselves for you.
I think it's just the reality of like like life, right? Not to be super deep, but it's kind of like it can
It's
happen. And
true.
my mom did nothing wrong, right? My mom
Right,
was
right, right, right.
like my family is like this fascinating, like it should be like a study. My dad, so my parents met in high school, but my mom went to the convent right after high school.
Oh, wow.
She's a nun for like, and then my dad went to the Naval Academy. It's like
Yeah.
War and Peace, and like they came back together. Like he came back from Vietnam, she was engaged, like so it's like this, like my sister, there's four of us, we're all so different, but we're obviously all very related. Like we've all
Yeah.
gone on very different paths from each other. And so, I think when this happened, it's like, it makes you question things like your faith. It makes you
Yeah.
question kind of humanity in general. It makes you kind of question, like, you're like, I have to be grateful for everything I have, but I'm also so angry right now, like, because I
Yes.
can't understand it. And then it
Oof.
also becomes a new relationship with my mom, which I became almost, and even to this day, my mom's kind of in the dementia and Alzheimer's space now, and so you see someone of a superwoman, right? Then overnight, that you see the reality of it, and I think that's it's still part of my life every day, and I think in good ways and bad ways, or challenging ways of managing that, because it's like there's so much emotion in that. And so at 18 and throughout college, and then my own, like, again, my mom was my biggest cheerleader, and to this day, when it's a good day, she still is for sure. And my dad has been super supportive, but I think from that day forward, I think also a lot of people don't know that about me, right? And I think that's by choice. I think we get to choose what stories people learn. I think it's as I got older, I started sharing more, but I think from that day forward, I kind of always felt like I could only, I had two lives I kind of lived, what I was willing to share, and then what I was absolutely was no one else for no one else to ever understand. And I think, again, as I've gotten older, and especially in the work I've done, I've opened up more. But I think it starts, I started almost separating myself, whether it's physically, in spaces, or whether it was at least emotionally, that I've always been able, I was, kept people kind of exactly where I needed them to be, because I was managing so much internally.
Yeah.
So that, again, I've never really shared it in that depth. And it's just more of like, just because I felt comfortable, to be honest with you. But I think, I've had a ton of inflections in my point with great managers, bad managers, being an only woman, like in fight, and all of that. But I think the reality is, like, one of the most, you know, one of the most impactful moments of my life is the moment of, like, you find out, your parent is human, and
Right.
now you're a
Yeah.
caretaker.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I will say this. I am so grateful for you sharing. One, personally, I feel so honored to be in this space with you having this conversation. The other part that I think is so wonderful is there's a part of you I'm so happy that you're getting to witness you're having this conversation as well. And the third part is this is the ripple effect stuff that as a leader you
Yeah.
already know that you have a ripple effect in what you do. But there are so many different people, especially again, we before we hopped on, like acknowledgement of what the last few years has done to our health, whether that be physical, mental, kind of our interpersonal health, our
Yep.
workplace health, all of those things are being impacted in such a way that oftentimes there is a lot more of our bodies being hit, a lot more of our health being hit, a lot more of us having to be de facto or, spontaneous, immediate caretakers and not having a rule book on how, not being sure how to handle the emotion of that. And I think as you're talking about kind of that the weight of the emotion of these things too, I think it's so
Yeah.
important. And especially again in the work that you do in the space and the space that you're holding for people that are holding so many different realities at the same time in our way of
Yeah.
looking at the world as it is, as it was, and as it will be. How
Yeah.
important it is to be able to understand, yeah, there are going to be times in my life where there are parts of myself I'm going to have to dial up or dial back depending on how much I'm able to bring here, if this
Yeah.
feels safe, if it's actually productive for me to move forward to what I need to do right now, if my energy can hold that. But
Right.
also it gives permission to be like, when I'm able to be vulnerable, look what it activates in my connection with other people. look what permission it gives for us to be more whole humans as we're trying to figure out things we don't know the answer to. And so I think there's so much power in your willingness to be vulnerable, your willingness to share, but also the space that that creates for you to then witness the other people in your life, whether that be your mother, your father, your siblings, or that be somebody that you have just met, or somebody that reports to you, or a collaborator, partner, board member, all those things. Like, the whole point of this podcast is to be like, by the way, no matter what our labels are, we're still all human. And so how beautiful it is to see that equality of it, while also realizing our experiences do differ and we don't always know what's happening behind us.
Yeah, I think that's like, and I think that, like, if I could be reflective of like, okay, what has it taught me? Like, right, I think it was exactly that there was like a storm happening, right at the same time, where everyone thought like I was like, I'm a high energy person. I'm an extrovert with a capital E, right? Like, I'm all in. And so I think that's the struggle at times, right? Is like, I'm like, if I'm someone that like enjoys people, enjoys conversation, like I get energy from it. And yet there's a whole part of myself that like I struggle to, like, I'm not denying, right? But it's like this mental health space. Like, so I think it honestly, as I feel more comfortable recognizing and talking about obviously mental health and all that, the wonderful aspects of it, but also recognizing like the humanity of life is like that simple. Like, we are so connected in that simple way. And like, people can be both, right? They can be they can be introverts and happy or sad, like extroverts and depressed and angry, like it doesn't have to be black and white. Life is exceptionally gray. And I think that's also where like the beautiful aspect of being, in community together. And I believe in being in community, is where, at dog tag, we always have a saying, it's an African proverb, but if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that's like a dog tag saying, right? Again, it definitely comes from an African proverb but we just find it so powerful in what we do. But it's also because like I found that powerful in my own life, right? Like, people are human and they're struggling. And it's, and like, to the point is like, how do we just find space to allow for people to be empowered and also recognize that while they're struggling, there's research out there, but there's community too, to kind of be seen, heard, and valued, on both sides of the coin. It's a struggle though. I mean, right? I mean, vulnerability is like, Brene Brown is like, vulnerability with courage. I'm like, yeah, girl, but like, that's a lot of courage.
It was not like a flipping of the switch. We gotta warm up to it. We gotta talk about like the vulnerability hangover too. So like on the other side of doing it. So it's like, I know what to do, but then also I still have to hold the whole experience and what I love so much. First of all, there's so many pieces of what you're sharing that to my brain, I'm like, oh, that it's like a comedy set callback. It's not funny, right? But the ability for, like, as you're talking about the African proverb, it reminds me of the kind of ritual experience of your mother being like, here's how I'm going to communicate with you on your way out the door. Whether I'm saying that to you when you're way out the door, you think that now every time you're at the door. This is kind of our mantra, the way we collectively work in your workplace, creating that space to be like, by the way, I'm not trying to win above all things, like in soccer, but also today we're doing this together, and how powerful that is. And this to me is why, as we're talking about your journey not being straight line, it being like, the thing that's the straight line is how you're showing up in these spaces, how you're creating spaces, how you're contributing to spaces, but also receiving from spaces that allows that humanity to be there. Because again, when you think of the spaces that you worked in, I mean, I'm going to just be in the finance world because that's where I was, right? But it isn't always, let's make room for, it's like, all right, the stock market's open, do your shit, right? It's like, go get it done. How'd that transaction go? We'll forget about it tomorrow, / if it's for 10 years out, how can we get the most? It's very much about get, do, less about like, and so being able to have that skill set, that knowledge, and that capacity and capability if needed, but also that grounding of, I'm going to look left, right, up, down, behind me to make sure that we are good. Again, our collective is together, but we're moving in the direction we want to. I'd love to hear your take on the evolution of the dog tag in particular, in your time, in your 11 years, which is always so funny, right? I met someone the other day, they're like, oh yeah, I'm 27. I'm like, oh my God, that's so close. I was like, oh my God, I'm 10 years older than you. How? That's not so close. Okay, cool. But like when you look back at 11 years,
Yeah.
I'm sure it feels like 30 and 30 days at the same time. But how
Yeah.
has that, being the first hire to the CEO, how has that kind of shifted one, dog tag's journey, but also your relationship to that call to serve?
Yeah, I mean, again, like I think not knowing like the mountain ahead of you, like naivete is like the best medicine. I mean, and I think that's like I think it's like I do think it's like this like the superpower of some of it because and I don't mean that like in a negative way. It's just like a journey. The journey is it half the battle is showing up every day, right? And I think that's like I gotta show up today, right? I know I am like overwhelmed with questions of like how to do this, how to do that, is that right? Is this wrong? But half the battle is just show up and then deal with it, right? Once you get there, it'll make it easier. And so, joining Dog Tag was kind of this big mission vision of like Father Curry literally took out a picture of in his wallet. So I met him at my best friend's wedding, which
Oh,
is like
nice.
hilarious, right? Like I had a Bud Light, I'm sure it's super classy. He had a glass of wine and he was like, the rehearsal dinner, I was a bridesmaid, and he was like, it took out of his wallet a picture, and it was a dog tag chandelier at the Vietnam Memorial Museum out of Chicago, which was a traveling one, and it was like 50,000 of the, like around 50,000 of like all of those killed in action and MIA and POW in Vietnam. It's exceptionally powerful. And he's like, this is going to be in the bakery. And I was like, where's the bakery? And he's like, oh, we don't have it, but the program is going to be amazing. Where's the program? Oh, I haven't created it yet. I'm like, okay, what do we got here, Doc? Like, what are we working with? And he's like, this is the vision. And so him and I just sat down and, I think another inflection point for me at one point was, again, I'd crazy kind of gotten this opportunity to apply for a job on a trading desk. Again, I was a middle office analyst. So I wasn't a trader or sales rep, the middle office, like, the kind of the grunt work. And I had bought into Lehman at that point. I was like, we're kind of cowboys in this world. And like, I don't mind, like, I used to not say the F word, right? And then by like day 3 of working on a trading desk, I was like, go fuck yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like I was
like, that's like the word the. What are we talking
right.
about?
Yeah. Part of my French on this podcast, so you can delete that out.
Oh,
but
no, it's
you know
welcome.
what I mean? Like, it was just as soon as like, and what happened is, we started hearing about Lehman and getting feedback, like layoffs started happening and you're going to desk, right? Everyone has the same line, right? They call the middle office line and everyone can pick it up. And so anytime that, at one point that call came in and you looked, it was Kirk's number, whoever he's asking for is getting laid off, right? And I was like 24. And I was like, what is happening here? Like, and I remember even going in and like, trying to be like, fire me. Like, I don't have kids. I like, and he was like, get out of my office. You're wasting my time. Don't cost us money. Right? Like I didn't cost them any money, right? You know who did? It was the people that have been working there 15 years, right? That were the ride or dies, that were the most loyal, that had worked there, started building a life and couldn't afford to change because they had to have that income.
Yes.
They're getting let go. And I just watched it like every single, and I literally like, that was for me, like, no, like I can't buy into like, I see, again, you see individuals stay in careers they don't necessarily love or even have any passion for, but they can't afford to not be there anymore. Right. They have, and so that moment, to be honest with you, it was like so clear. I mean, I continued at Barclays and for another year, and then I went to Macquarie, an Australian firm. I worked in settlements as an executive assistant to global head of settlements and domestic. I had 2 women. And then I was a program, like a project management for their team. Like I made a total lateral, maybe even step down. But it's because like, oh, time to be a trader. I was potentially like had an opportunity potentially at the programs desk. And I was like, oh, no. And it wasn't like I'm not a martyr. I'm not better than. I do enjoy making money. Like I'm not, it was just like what that looks like is not the life I want. Right. And so when I met with Father Curry at a wedding, like rehearsals there, I'm a bridesmaid, my best friend's wedding. Like I was, and he has this vision. Like it was just the excitement and the passion of like I could really be part of something big here. Was so exciting that I literally came home that weekend and told my roommate, who's still one of my best friends, like I'm moving to DC to help start a nonprofit bakery. And she's like, what happened at this wedding? Like, like what the
What was in that cake? Yeah.
and so what I'd say is like Father Curry, he's passed. He passed in 2000, December of 2015, but he was magnetic and he was irreverent and he had this complexity to him that was just brilliance mixed with like just him being human too, right? Imperfect.
Yeah.
And I just kind of went all in, right? I mean, I was Googling how to write a business plan. The financials he had were like, flour costs from like 1995. I was like, oh dear Lord, like I'm in charge of this. Like, who thought this was? And again, I think that's kind of part of where I don't have an MBA. Like I'm not, I value education. I just think education needs to be a tool. So I've never gone back for an MBA because I don't think I need an MBA. What I needed is I've taken certificates, I've been in a leadership, great leadership program. And so for me, just the startup was exactly that. It was kind of like, okay, we need to make sure there's a need here. And so we started going out and meeting with other organizations in the veteran space. We started going to Walter Reed and Fort Belvoir and Quantico and the USL and talking about the idea we had of our program. Was there interest? Wasn't there interest? Right? I mean, the whole point was like you don't want to recreate the wheel, and we realized there was a need for our program. Like we felt like a very specific niche that wasn't being filled, and there was like a ton of doubts because we have a different model. We have a 5-month fellowship program for 16 fellows at a time. Right? It's not a numbers-based game for us. We're not trying to do we don't deal with socks. You can't do 10,000 more, 10 cents cheaper and outsource it to a third world country, right? Like that's not our mission is people, and people are complex, which require time, energy, and effort.
Yeah.
And so we built this model, and again, we met our other co-founder about a year later, and we able to through her support, and the building was bought in support of our fellowship. And
Nice.
that first cohort, I mean, I have a special place in my heart for the rest of my life with them because they really were part of building Dog Tag. And I'm a civilian, right? Yes, I'm a military kid. Yes, I'm very influenced by Marine Corps family upbringing, but I'm a civilian. I didn't sign up, didn't volunteer to serve. And so you also you had to go into this with a lot of humility, right? Like if you're gonna serve, you need to listen. Right? This isn't about ego. It's not what you think should be built. It's about what needs to be built or what needs to be like effectively, streamlined or connected. And so it really started kind of from that place of humility and like service and learning, right? Day one, it was like, why is everyone sitting on the perimeter and why is everyone like away from the door?
Yeah.
It was like, oh, I realized because there's 2 doors and they were like in very specific positions that our service members very specific could not have their backs to the door because they've been trained their entire life, right? Like that might seem simple to those that have served, but it's totally foreign to but like that's the workforce, right? And so anyways, it became that whole aspect of startup and learning and then changing and pivoting and then learning more. And be able to start building a team that was really like exceptionally strong, especially in the beginning, and incredibly dedicated. And I think that's also like you're building an organization, you're not building just a program. And so you got to start thinking about how do you also start thinking about building an organization that's as supportive of their team members as they are of a fellowship, right? Here are all the amazing benefits for the fellows, but there's none of that for the staff, right? Or the team. So anyways, the evolution again, and it was definitely like your first 2 years of your startup, like your first year, like I don't even remember it barely. I think everything was on fire or nothing was on fire, but both could be true. And I think, it was probably wonderful and terrible. I think both of those were a little bit true too. And so, I think it wasn't really until like 2000, we started a pilot in 2014, our second class in 2015. And by 2016, we started running 2 cohorts a year. And we started kind of getting our groove for sure. The bakery also got its groove, COVID, exceptionally challenging. I think it challenged in a different way, right? I think it was, in some ways, everyone was affected. So it wasn't like we did something wrong, but it still meant that we had to figure out how does our program still relevant or not. And we did surveys and we realized our fellows were 100% in person and now they're 100% virtual. And they said, I need a place to be every morning at 9 a.m. I need tools to make sure I'm still growing and evolving when there's so much out there that's unknown. I need to have community because like I'm trying to teach my kid like fifth grade math and I don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
I need to have something for me. You know, the simplicity of that, right? It was like we were okay, so our program still needed. It wasn't like about like, are you gonna be an entrepreneur and how much money you're gonna make in the first 3 years, right? It was like the simplicity of a human being saying, I need connection every single day, because that's for my mental health and my well-being, what's gonna keep me going,
Yeah.
right? Then we're gonna keep this program going, right? It
Yeah.
was kind of but even as you know, you and I kind of pre-podcast started, is like the pendulum shifted so far, and now we're shifting. Now it's trying to like rebuild differently. And although I loved I think we started exactly as we should. Like, I couldn't have known any better back then. Than all I like. You make the best decision with the most information you have at that time.
Yeah.
And then there's a great Maya Angelou quote is like, do the best you can, and when you know you can do better, do better. And that's just kind of like how I think about it. Like, this isn't about perfection. It's not about saying we're the best. I want to be the best in class. I want to be exceptional in the way services we provide. But I don't like, if our program doesn't work for you, I'm going to make sure you have another program to go to then.
Right.
So I think
Right.
part of this rebuilding, it needs to be different, right? So it wasn't perfect before. So why are we just going to go back to the way it was? I think society is, for the better, exceptionally changed through our, the racial recognition and acknowledgement and transgender and I mean, don't ask, don't tell just came out CBS story with Pat Milton, which was phenomenally covered with
Yeah.
Panetta. I mean, there's just a different world. And I think the challenge that come with that is that we're not fully trained in a lot of ways or having all the right tools to help always be more proactive as we want to be, right?
Yeah.
I think I'm still learning and educating myself in different ways. And
Yeah.
I hope I don't ever think I shouldn't be. I
Right.
think that so I think the evolution is like this is a different world. And I
A
think
lot
we
of
need
ways.
to recognize there's a new program. There's a new way. And what does it look like to rebuild differently?
Yeah. There's so many pieces of what you just shared that I feel like are universal for so many of us in trying to process how we're re-entering the world slash, you know, reclaiming our sense of identity in the world and our purpose and our path, but also how do we interact with each other? How do we move from seeing one another as a threat to being the collective that is operating in this world? I mean, literally people's breath was a threat to you. And so the ability to kind of create space for us to reintegrate with it's okay, there's safety here is I think such an important thing that oftentimes when you talk about that pendulum swing, so many times we're like, all right, it's like I think it was like a soccer game, right? All right, they blew the
Yeah.
whistle, game's over, let's go. It's like, no, that's not how this is working. Like we're
Yeah.
bringing everything that we, all of the complex emotions, but also like this is not this is a phase in your life that everyone goes through. No, this is not something that happens that we are programmed or prepared to navigate 3 years of literally feeling like nothing is safe. And then systems treating us all like we're the same when we very much are not. And so, like, and by that, I mean, there's a lot of systems that aren't actually set up that way, but here is how you handle COVID, right? Here's the 5-step plan on how to do this. Here's a 5-step plan on how to reopen your business. Like all of these very short, small, and assumed universal ways for us to navigate what is so uniquely complex for each of us. And the way that I love so much and how you talked about this, that yes, okay, we're going to not just assume we know, but we're going to ask. And we're going to ask what people need specifically so that what we offer is relevant and useful for them. Not like, well, this is what we've been building for 3 years and they don't need it anymore, but I'm going to just keep doing it. Which I think is what we're seeing in a lot of ways of that pendulum swinging back to like, let's just go back to normal. It's like, right, but we've started to see that like we've been
Right.
carrying a whole lot of excess weight on things that we don't need, even if we spent so much time and energy on that. Can we trim that? Or can we repurpose that? Can we move that in other directions? Can we, like, I love when you're like, maybe we're not the folks that can serve you, but I know a whole group of
Right.
people that I can direct you to. So I'm not going to leave you on the cold if you're not with me. But
Yeah.
it is, again, it's part of serving a community to be able to say, I see you, I see your needs. I may or may not be able to meet them right now, but I'm going to do the best that I can now that I have that new information is so pivotal, powerful. And to me, I know I have my very specific way, but like I believe that's what leadership is. I believe that's how we can lead in our own lives and seeing all those same complexities in our internal experience and externally. How do we
Yeah.
create space for change? Because that is the constant, right? So I love so much as you're talking about this, how not only was it a idea at a wedding, like feel like it's like the napkin slash the photo, right? It's like I wrote it down.
Right.
Yeah, sure, we'll make that happen. I
Yeah,
don't know how, but
exactly.
and that is still the energy that's like we have the potential to create amazing things. We might not know exactly how we're going to get there or exactly what it is, but it doesn't mean it's any less powerful or any less viable. We can trust that if we are operating within that ethos, that we will be supported to continue to take our shots.
100%. I think one of like when you go back to like kind of ethos and values, like I think values cannot be understated. And I mean, like, I mean, they're the most influential and important aspect. If you're making a decision, I believe in values-based decisions, right? I mean, I think I cannot operate without trust. I know that I cannot operate with authenticity, right? If I feel as though, and I was like, obviously you have to have, different management of like, what does authenticity mean? But I cannot trust the space I'm in. I struggle to then be able to bring my full self, right? To make a decision or propose something forward or interact, right? And I think there's different modularizations of that for sure. So part of what like I'm like, again, I can, there's things that I look back and I wish we'd done differently or been better, and 100%, right? And I think it just, now we're pulling in as many tools in different ways, or just learning, right? Educating, continuing to build. I think, again, culture is built every day, right? And I think if that's where I'm operating from, trust, respect, and authenticity, like I need that, then I need to make sure I'm creating that, right? Like we've had, fellow staff members within a variety of communities and varied backgrounds, and every, again, gay, lesbian, transgender been part of our program, right? And then you have like so much hate that comes in a different way that has never happened before. And we, from different, again, covering all different communities, Black, Brown, African American, again, this, and so you're like running an organization and you're like, how do I protect? How do I provide support? And like, how do we make sure that our policies, our procedures, how, like, again, it becomes this like overwhelming at times, because the fear is not like, afraid of like, I'm not afraid of like me being wrong, like ego wise. I'm afraid of a disservice to like our community. Like I'm afraid of like not showing up for them, right? I'm afraid that like my biggest fear is letting people down, right? Like letting them down, even if they say the bakery is a safe place for me to be, and I allow someone to come into that space that it's not, right? Or creating, not being reflective of policies that, I don't know, that could have something in. So again, I think that's the challenge too, is like, oh man, how did I not all, like some of this was already in the works, or something was already like, part of who we are, but then there's also some learning that you go through that, you have to like really, it's not about you, right? So kind of like, like we just need to like educate ourselves. We just need to make sure like we are doing the work, and like figuring out and like quietly just making sure we're providing every individual to have, honesty, authenticity, like trust and respect in every way possible in how they work with dog tag. It's not perfect. I'm sure there's people that would, but the point is like that's all I can do. That's all we can do is like work from those values.
I love, it's so funny because one of the things that was it's so apparent, and also I feel like so often in the larger messaging isn't necessarily given the highlight, is when you're serving the veteran community, you're serving one of the most diverse communities from a workplace that is the most diverse employer, right? In the world. And yet oftentimes we're told that there's a very small number of ways you can operate, right? So you have all these unique individuals going through an experience that there is training intentionally so that you can do your job well. But then when you are coming back into society as the unique individual you are, how do you bring forward the strengths and the useful elements of what you've learned? But also, is there permission for you to start to see yourself as an individual versus a huge part of the experience is, how am I with my brothers and sisters? How am I a component of us being successful? And so that kind of reintegration process of becoming a civilian, but also the reintegration process of being like, all right, my experience is something that like we see on movies, TV, we talk about, but like we don't talk about. We don't talk about as you're like the perimeter, like we're sitting at the perimeter. We don't talk about the permission for me to actually, speak in a certain dynamic of people. The leadership hierarchy that I've grown up in, is that something that we need in this moment right now? And do I have permission or even a semblance of safety to be able to try something outside of that? And so it's so interesting. I'd love to hear your take on the importance of creating that space to be like, hey, unique individual, we want to hear from you, but also creating a space that feels inclusive enough to be wherever you are in that journey of discovery, decision making, and values based decisions on one, here's how I want to show up in my life, but here's how I want to interact with other people.
Yeah, I mean, again, how we kind of talk about is like the military is black and white. That's why it's so efficient, right? There's a lot of things that are already answered for you. There's a manual for everything that needs to be built, and it needs to be that way because you're training so many people. You don't have an option, right? And so, and in a lot of ways, like for promotion, that's really like if you do this, this, and this, then there's promotion, right? There's just so much clarity because there's so much process.
Yeah.
And as you transition out, it's gray, right?
It's
And I
much less
think,
process.
yeah, I mean, it's like, well,
Yeah.
what do you want? What do you want to be? Have you thought about it? Right? Like, I have been training, and my military spouse is like 20% unemployment rate in a good market,
Wow.
right?
Okay.
Like, military spouses are like, I mean, again, there's a ton of great work that's being done. Military caregivers, I mean, I don't like, they don't even have data points on that now, right? But like the implications of this war on our service members, but on their families and specific caregivers, like it is, we haven't even touched it, right? Like in the next 20, 30 years, it's going to be, the medical field is not going to be able to withstand the needs of our service members and then caregivers, right? Because it's 24/7. Caregiving is no longer a job. It's not like hospice care or, 9 to 5 giving, supporting elderly. It's, it's a variety of demographics, ages, races, and needs, right? And it's 24/7, care across the board. So,
and expertise. It's not something that like you can pull someone off the street to be able to help. You need to learn and be supported with the education of how to interact and do the work.
Advocating necessary is like it's unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
So when you talk about the complexity of like service, what we also is like what I see it as, and it's not trying to simplify it, but it's two different cultures. They don't like, what is a societal norm, right? What is a dress code of business casual versus business normal, like business formal, right? Like that might just seem like a term, but if you don't understand like what to wear, right? Like how also like kind of lonely can that feel? Like if I don't know what the hell I'm gonna wear, right? Like resumes, right? Like the simplicity of being able to understand what you've done, or a military spouse being like, I have volunteered for Toys for Tots and I ran the entire thing as a volunteer. But it's like, but they just put volunteer down, right? Because they didn't have the opportunity of getting back into the workforce because they're going to move in a year or 2 years, right?
But it was still very much a job.
100%, right? Like the military spouses are the CEOs of the family. They are running shit. And so I think the complexity of what we see is like our organization, when I was talking about the complexity of all the different backgrounds, like that's also a dog tag team, right? There's a richness in our team. And so what we say is like, I'm a civilian, right? Our fellows come in and you drop rank, labels, all of that, right? You're known as Nikki and Meghan, and we want to get to know Nikki, right? So what does that look like? So that's why it's 5 months. There's 5 areas: academics, experiential learning, network building, business planning, and then the wraparound service is the most important. It's wellness, right? We have a whole course called Finding Your Voice, which our fellows take the time and space to like learn what their story is. So for 5 months, like, what are your values? Like, right, we'll bring in partners and do like, leadership development. And you might realize like what you thought was your leadership style was actually what you needed to be in the military, but you don't want to be that anymore, right? Like, and so part of this for 5 months is a discovery place, right? It is this place of like finding your voice. So when you look at our measurements, we actually work with Rand Corporation now. And it was because we were getting survey results of like, oh, employment rate in entrepreneurship, which is great. And how many people are going back to school? Fantastic. Like that for me does not mean necessary success. Success means that someone can say, after 2 years, I've left dog tag, graduated 2 years ago. I feel more confident in the ability to advocate for myself in a personal professional setting. I feel like I can build more genuine, authentic relationships with my community. I'm going back and serving in my community in a very simple way. Like 54% of our alumni are volunteering in their community, right? They're finding a new way to serve. I think that's where you create sustainable change, right? You don't do it by someone can get a great job and they get fired, not because of anything they did, right? I learned that pretty quickly at Lehman. So now are they not successful anymore because they're not employed? So like wellness is a key component of that. Some individuals of our fellowship like graduate and they say, I haven't taken care of myself in years.
Yeah.
Take 6 months off. I'm gonna take a year off. And like financially, that can be a budgeting issue. And we actually try to work with them to kind of be able to plan for some of these things.
Yeah.
Right. But it's like, oh my God, I haven't stopped. Right. I just need to reconnect my family. I just need to reconnect myself. And like health is wealth, right? That's it. And so when we think about how we serve, I think what we think about is, we can't be everything to everyone. So we partner well with others, right? We partner with Community Warrior Project for mental health because we recognize like we don't have the skill sets, nor should we try to. We wanted to be good at what we do. We want to use everyone else for what they do well. We have academic partners like Georgetown or Loyola because I'm not great at accounting, to be honest with you. I know how to do it, but I don't want to teach it. But this is also, so I say like, we've thought about like, what do we need to focus on? What are we exceptionally good at? But then what do we do well? What do we not do? And how do we find the right people to do that? And I think by growing that about serving a very complex group of individuals, building a community around them, an ecosystem around them is one of our common goals. Because the goal isn't to say dog tag cures everything or solves everything. We are part of a solution, but we are just part of it. We can be a planting of a seed, we can be a jumping off point, but you need to make sure you're connected to the rest of the community to kind of for that next level and next step of what you need. So I don't know. I don't know if I answered it correctly or not correctly, but it has its own, but I think at the end of the day, it's just like, how do we, like when you think about refugees coming to the United States, like what is that culture like? What does that cultural shift look like for them, right? Like what is
and what is a sustainable approach to it? Not just how can I get you in and through this program and say, oh, check the box, it's done, rather than being like, how can I, yes, you go through this program, but also how are you buoyed to be supported coming out of it, that it isn't a drop on the other side of it.
It's like, that kind of savior model, which drives me nuts, right? It's like, here's a hammer, we're going to teach you to use it. It's amazing, it's so useful. All right, we got to go, we're going to take our hammers back.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, what the hell just happened? What? Right? What and in between, someone took a selfie and a photo and posted it and said, look at the good work I'm doing today. Right. And it's about them and not about how like their community is now negatively impacted. I think building a trust amongst our community is also really key. If we do not do what we say we do, we build a distrust for other better organizations, but most importantly, we build a distrust in the community we're trying to serve. So, I mean, you got to take that with the greatest level of respect and responsibility, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I love, and it's so funny. I feel like what you were talking about a little bit ago about kind of the navigating the fear of maybe misstepping or not knowing the answer, or being able to support people or somebody, entering the space. You're like, this isn't safe for everybody anymore. That tends to be a lot of the conversation we have when we're made aware of things we didn't plan for, things that are out of our control. And then the beauty of what I'm hearing from you is that, yes, that happens, but also in opening the door where fear might come in, amazing, beautiful things that we never would have had come in as well. If our armor is up, nothing comes in. The good, the bad, nothing comes in. And the beauty of when you're saying, not only, we do what we do and we try to do it the best of our ability, but we also realize that by staying open, we have more people that come in, more partners that come in that can create that path to culture shock, to kind of culture collaboration, versus being like, well, I need you to just assimilate from one culture to another in your experience, but more, can we build a community that has you feeling safe to be able to pull the skills that you had, the experiences that you had, process them, but also trust the world around you that's not necessarily what your last however many years have been. That you don't have to rely on me, Meghan, you don't have to rely on us, Dog Tag, but here's how you build relationships. Here's how you have these conversations. Here's how you can start recognizing what, instead of fear, risk, threat looks like, what safety, trust, and belonging feels like. And getting that kind of skill set added to your toolkit is important. Stop being afraid of everything. Stop seeing everything as a threat, because that's just literally not how our brains work. We can't do that unless we
Right.
lobotomize ourselves. Can't do that. So is it taking the shame away from
Yeah.
the things that one culture might not be might not be in the
Right.
same level as, and then adding to a toolkit saying, by the way, your ability to be so hyper aware is such an incredible asset. Here's how we can channel that. How powerful it is to do that mindset shift, to create the space for them to discover themselves. Not for me to be like, I mean, it's like a therapist isn't telling you, here are the 5 things you need to change your life. It's literally like, I'm going to create space and ask you questions for you to be able to discover it. Because
Yeah.
if I fish for you, you're never going to learn how. And so the power and the importance of creating that space, yes, in the fellowship, but also in the community and beyond, is like, that's, to me, this is why I'm like, and sustainable
Oh,
impact, because
totally.
that's what I hear.
Yeah, I mean, that was our quote when we first started. It's like, it's about how to teach a woman or man how to fish, right? And it's like, also one of the things we've always believed in is like the power of our alumni and the community. And so like that is part of this sustainable change. Like I want those that graduate from our program to stay connected to dog tag, like through by being part of the alumni, and like being able to come together and connect one-on-one. And like that's their memory of dog tag, that's their support of dog tag, but it's still theirs now, and they're building it differently too. And so we see that happening, like, right, we see people hiring each other, we see people supporting each other. We have a monthly Zoom where we do like give or gets, like what can you give to the community, what can you get from it, right? To have a healthy relationship, there needs to be both. You can't just give everything, or you just can't ask for everything. And I think that's where right, this is this idea, like this isn't about us, like allow us to play the role we can play and let us do a really good job of it. Trust us with the process. Allow yourself to be in it, and allow yourself to be vulnerable enough to kind of hear it. And I kind of say, like, act like you've known each other for 10 years, like cut the bullshit, allow yourself to be here, and I learned that from a great friend of mine. And so by allowing us to do what we do well for those 5 months, what then opens up the door is like, now they have a bigger community when they get out to, it's like, oh my gosh, there's 200 of you, right? And now, like, when there's, hey, I need help with finding a CPA, it's like as transactional, like, oh, here's 5, or here's a few, or here's what I've learned, to like, hey, I need some prayers, right? Okay, you got some prayers, right? Like, but I'm not on those calls, right? Or I'm not the connector of it. It's the community coming together. So that's like the biggest vision, right? I just feel like that's where sustainable change continues, I hope, is through that, right? Through those networks of support and just engagement together. And again, we've kept saying it, but like being in community is just, it is the difference, right? When you start going down a rabbit hole, or
Yeah,
when you want
and
to
you can't
celebrate.
forget it. In the same way that you can't forget, like, once you're in a space that's like that, you're going to start creating those spaces in your life that aren't necessarily dog tag, but you've had the experience and the permission to learn, to try, to stumble in an incubator that's like, we're expecting you to stumble. So like, please don't look for perfect.
Yeah,
Please.
yeah,
That's the point here. And
a
how
hundred
beautiful it is
percent.
for you to activate your autonomy to be able to create those is like, and again, this is where it goes back to, like, I don't need to win every game I play, but I do want to make sure that I'm constantly building the camaraderie. I want to build the resilience. I want to build the skills and the tools, because, oh my goodness, that was a new challenge I didn't know. But now that I know it's there, there's ways for me, this incredibly big thing we have in our heads called the brain has an amazing way to start charting new paths and being able to see new things. But if you don't trust that you have the capacity for that, and the world around you is telling you how you operate is wrong, it can be really challenging to go back and trust that. So to create a space that's like, we believe that you have so much capacity, like probably more than you even know, more than we really know. But the beauty of this culture, this move, this collaboration, this phase for you is explorative, that you get the opportunity to like chart a path and see what's there. And we don't even know what's at the end of the rainbow. There's so much goodness that happens on your trek to get there. And maybe you're not even seeking that,
Right.
how that is so, so powerful. So I think one of the questions that is coming up for me is, as somebody that, is so dialed into the needs and is surveying, but also communicating in community with folks, what is something, because I think I'll say this, in my corporate life,
Yeah.
we had ERGs, we had groups
Yeah.
that were like, all right, so when I was at Bain, we had a veterans at Bain group, right?
Right.
What, and so that's kind of more structural, like this is how we do it, this is our group, here's our logo,
Right.
all that stuff, right? But I think there is something to be at least held space for, talked about directly, of like the incredible assets that folks in the veteran community, whether it be veterans, veteran families, can bring, as we're talking about like what are the elements in the kind of corporate space, since both you and I have background
Yeah.
in knowledge of positives, negatives, and whatever's in between.
Yeah.
How have you witnessed veterans in your community like shining in a way that you're like, oh my goodness, like we all need more of this? And that's the kind of part of the product of the experience that is the culture of being in the military.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think I always go back to like seeing my mom serve in a variety of ways, right? And I think it was kind of like, you know, as much as my dad, my mom represented, probably if not more in different ways, because my dad was exceptionally involved in my life, coaching the soccer team, all like the basketball teams. But my mom was the one that was handling it all, right? And I saw my mom be in community constantly, right? She was lecturing at church. Um, there was never a point where one of us said, "Hey, a friend, we have a friend that might need a place to crash tonight," right? Like it would just she would just make the couch up, or we add an extra chair to the dinner table, right? Or invite them over for their birthday and not tell them and have a cake ready for them, right? My mom was like, except she still is in different ways now, but exceptionally thoughtful of her, of just making people be part of a family, right? Or be part of something. And I think that like the military community across the board, understands, this idea of it's so hard in some ways to even express, but of showing up for each other, right? I think the challenge that happens is like you might be in service as a service member in any branch, and the person next to you is going to cover your back no matter what. They might hate you. You don't even have to like each other, but no matter what, they have your back. And now you get out and you have a colleague that's next to you and he's like a total tool bag. And you're like, he definitely doesn't have my back. If anything, he's trying to undercut me to get that promotion, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
there's this distrust. But what I've seen in the community is that selfless service, right? This want to be part of serving each other, this want to rising tide lifts all ships mentality, where, hey, have you heard about this resource, right? They're just so willing to connect with others for support and be part of it. And so, we have so many different alumni that have like gone out and created amazing, anything from, I've mentioned him before, but Pete Scott, he runs his own farm now called Fields for Valor. And it's where he's now employing, service members to be help train them in farming. But most importantly, he takes the vegetables and it's like a CSA farm for service members and their families and veterans, right? And just like he was doing it for himself too, right? Like I think he recognized like he had to be outside and it's like he needed his hands dirty, and there was kind of like this paying back some of the dues, right? He felt like he needed to do. There's a military spouse, and caregiver who's now, she had become the breadwinner because she had 4 kids and recognized that although she was an amazing teacher, like that was not where she was headed. So she started her own business called Organized Q, where she has virtual executive assistants and she employs, I think she started it, this is one of her business idea in the program. She now employs like 30 individuals, mostly military spouses, some veterans, right? And so what we know is like, it's, this is the challenge of the community serve. Syracuse, the Institute of Veterans and Military Family, has some amazing research. And one of the biggest data points that I love to reference is like 48% of World War II veterans, when they got out, started small businesses, right? So who are they hiring, right? But like now, who are the community members, right? These are small business owners. They're probably serving on boards. They're probably in government too, right? They're getting more involved. But who are they hiring, right? Family and friends, who are mostly probably service members or their kids or their whatever. Less than 6% today of veterans are starting their own businesses. So it's less than 1% of our population volunteers to serve the country. 60% of those that we're recruiting right now come from military families. So this population is so isolating, right? It's only becoming smaller and smaller. And
Yeah.
the struggle is there's this 99% that I'm part of, that you're part of, that like if we don't connect on this human level, right? And recognize the value out of those who have served both home and abroad,
Yeah.
it's going to become, it's a national crisis in different ways, right? In a variety of ways, but it's also becoming this um, population that becomes more and more isolated in not just like uh, identifying as a service member or not, but like as community, right?
Right.
And so military spouses don't want to identify as military spouses, right? Because they have a struggle getting hired, right? Military caregivers struggle to get work because for 10 years, they have been working every single day, but it's been very specifically in service to that service member, right? Service members, right, struggle just to find that purpose, right? That like clear like understanding of a mission.
Yeah.
And so again, I think when our demographic that I'm so fortunate to be part of and serving, they bring together this everyone says like trainability, all of that is 100% true.
Yeah.
But it's the ethos and values that they're going to bring to you as a friend, as a companion, as a coworker, as a leader that is just uncomparable to any other experience that is out there.
Yeah.
But again, there's a little bit of this misunderstanding of it at times. There's a glorification of it for sure.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's a mistrust of it as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's so funny when we talk about glorification, I'm always like, well, the other side of glorification is vilification. Because both of those things are dehumanizing. Both of them don't actually honor the reality, complexity, and the nuance of being a person. And it's so beautiful what you were saying, because I feel like one of the pieces that does get lost in how when we give people spaces and ERGs and groups and labels and names to be seen and felt and heard and supported, oftentimes it can be a breeding ground for us to make very broad sweeping assumptions. And it can be really challenging to feel as though you're part of even a group when you're like, well, this is what I have to be in order to fit in here. Well, that's not me. And so it is, I think, really important for us to honor and acknowledge that first of all, thank you for the data, because I did not know the data. And it makes a lot of sense that we are in a position where we are right now, but also the historical, right? I mean, like 40%, 48% of folks that came back from World War II were creating small businesses in a country that, I mean, that our economy, that was heyday kind of stuff. Like that's building the cornerstone of how we operate now. So
Yeah.
what and how did our perception shift? And also, I think one of the pieces that I'm sure, I mean, is how are we supporting one another? How are we opening our arms on the other side to say, come on in? And
Yeah.
yes, trainability, but also I feel like my callbacks, the part when we were talking about earlier of like what it is to be a good teammate is to be able to handle systems and situations changing on a dime.
Oh,
And
I mean,
if nothing else, but the thing is, we're in a world right now where we assume that everything's 5 seconds away from us on our phone. And so the ability to be like, this shit broke, I'll fix it. But not being it, rather than this shit broke, I got to call the person and complain to this, or I'm mad about it. And so I'm just going to stay in my anger versus being like, all right, that sucks. What can I see? How can I move us forward towards a solution? No matter
100%.
what your capacity, capability, resume says, that is something that unfortunately in the culture of civilian nature has been kind of deprogrammed from us. We assume that things are been too. And so the ability to say, hey, I know how to solve problems. And by the way, like I'm really good at it. And if I'm not good at something, I'll figure out how to get better at it or find somebody else. Like that's the kind of stuff that as you're talking about like the community building and the connection, but also the like tangible like productivity element of it that we're lacking so significantly in a lot of places and spaces. And we're constantly like, oh, and this tends to be in generational change conversations of like, oh, they're lazy or they're incompetent or they're too old for this. Like all whatever the blame and name and blame game, the separation of each other, instead of realizing like we actually have such an incredible capacity when we come together. And so I just like, first of all, I'm so amped that the listeners got to know more about Dog Tag. How do you recommend for people if they're interested in learning more or getting connected? How should they go about connecting with you outside of listening to this wonderful conversation?
Yeah, totally. I mean, again, so what we try to do is kind of bring our program to life a little bit. So if you follow us on Instagram at Dog Tag Bakery, like we have posts about our fellows. Usually there's like a weekly wrap up, so you can kind of see what's happening on a weekly basis or get to meet our fellows that way. And obviously we're on like Facebook and Twitter, all Dog Tag Bakery. So you can check out our bakery, our delicious baked goods, obviously. And I think what we try to do is we try to show like every aspect of our organization, both personal, like both kind of the personal side of the fellowship, which is like lessons learned, and then we also try to bring some fun into it. But yeah, I mean, again, we're also obviously on our website. We try to actually really update that on a consistent basis on our impacts of our program. But you can meet our team at Dog Tag, I think it's www.dogtaginc.org. And yeah, definitely check it out. I mean, again, I think you can see kind of we're a really fascinating organization. We use our bakery as a living business school to teach kind of the entrepreneurial and small business aspect. But it's also really just about kind of this culture integration, right? A lot of our team members at Dog Tag that help run it every day are civilians. And so that's like the simple way of bridging the gap. Just every day we do it by interacting, right? Yeah. Like, cool, you're a sergeant, don't know what that means, but we're gonna make rolls today, right? Or like, oh, don't know what that means. I mean, I need your budget, right? Like, and so again, I would just encourage you to please check us out. We'd love it. And appreciate you just being part of what we're doing every day.
Yeah. So like everybody go follow, go check out your website. I think there is so much wisdom that you shared here that like I feel like I got to receive. I can't wait for everybody else.
Nick, you're so generous. Like download. You make such an easy space for this conversation. And again, I just want to reiterate, like what I said, like, again, I'm learning, right? There's no perfect version of myself, no perfect version of Dog Tag. And that's something that we strive to be the best, right? And we're learning every day. And I am always open to like sharing anything and everything, and not in a glorified way, but in a really like, oh yeah, we messed that up real big, or that was a huge success and we had no idea it was going to happen that way. Again, I think that's kind of the beauty of it, is like just the ability to relate. And so again, anything I shared, I continue to follow your podcast and learn from others too, but I kind of share all of this, not cavalierly or anything, just with like complete humility of I'm learning every day, and like I'm proud of what we've been able to do and what I've been able to do with Dog Tag, but there's more to go.
Yes. And there's, again, for those of you listening, like this is that energy of like open door. If there's ways to connect and questions you have, you never know the magic of connecting people. And so I'm so grateful for you coming here. I'm so grateful that we stumbled into each other at an event a couple of months, well, I guess it's like 5 months ago now, but it was such a treat. And like, my body's all warm again. My body tells me more than my mind does. This is truly such a treat. I can't wait to keep an eye on all the things, support you. And by the way, let me just add this. Anyone's in DC, go to Dog Tag Bakery. Like,
3206 Gray Street, you're right in Georgetown. Again, we have a delicious bakery that we have product we make every morning and every afternoon. We also have an online, so if you want to order any gift boxes or any delicious treats, we're nut-free certified too. So again, we would welcome you to come in and enjoy a really great cup of coffee at the end of the day,
Yes. See, break bread together. I'm here for it. Meghan, thank you. Truly, thank you so much for being here.
Awesome.
I'm so grateful.
Yeah, I'm so grateful too. Thank you for creating the space for it. I mean it.
Wasn't that such a wonderful conversation? Meghan and I could have talked forever. As you heard, we actually started talking before the episode and brought some more of that magic back in this conversation. She shared so much about herself, her journey, her generous way of operating in this world and leading differently than what we usually see as what a leader is supposed to do. She activates so much humanity in the process. She's so humble. She's so curious. And really, to me, that is the embodiment of what I talk about when I talk about modern leadership. So I hope it resonated with you and the future that you're hoping to build and the way that you're looking to lead your life. Again, I will mention, definitely, if you are in the DC area, check out Dog Tag, go and have a wonderful snack and get to know some of the amazing people in the Dog Tag network. And I will catch you on the next episode, my friends.